Let's start off with maybe an overview of the airline industry, the aviation industry. First, the industry had to deal with the effects of the pandemic. Now you're dealing with the after effects. How did it look from inside the industry during the pandemic, and how do things look now?
Yeah, I mean, we say pandemic, but I mean, it wasn't really just a pandemic. It was a pandemic followed by a war, followed by an energy crisis. It's been we've sort of been bouncing from crisis to crisis for the better part of many years now. And so I guess to address a few of them, I mean, yeah, COVID was, it was quite something. I mean, we went back to the first months of when did it all start? 2021 or 2020 when it started? So the first months of 2020, and airlines were booming. It was really all-time highs. It was booming, and we went from a boom period to a bust, and it happened very quickly. And so we went from 50,000 passengers to maybe 200 a day. You'd be hard-pressed to find a passenger. So we had like a ghost terminal, and it was tough. I mean, it's a sector, at least here in Hungary, that doesn't have any state support. So we had to remove a third of our workforce. That's 500 families that were impacted. And so it was a heavy, heavy time. And then, of course, you're going through COVID and not knowing all the uncertainties that we all had. And then, of course, the war breaks out. And then you find yourself in the middle of a refugee center at the airport. And that was also a very emotional, tough time. And, you know, you'd have thousands of people either trying to get out back home, or interestingly enough, coming back. And I think the hardest part of that period was that you actually had a lot of Ukrainian families that had gone to Egypt or wherever for a fun and sun holiday, not knowing that their lives were about to change fundamentally. And of course they got stranded. And then, so, you know, at the airport we were witnessing flights coming in, and then families going out the front door of Terminal 1, which we had temporarily reopened, and splitting into two in front of your own eyes, and men going back to fight, and the women and the children going elsewhere. And it was a very, very emotional period. I have to say, I went home in tears numerous times. This was it. But we got through it. I think what's interesting about an airport is that it's not just an airport. It's an ecosystem made up of many different parts and pieces, and each of them plays their role in this whole kind of theater that's ongoing. And if any one piece of that drops out, the whole machine falls apart. But it's a very tight machine, and in these periods I'm talking about, the machine came together. It coalesced. It worked as a team. It wasn't pointing fingers. People were doing what they needed to do. We had so many staff working long nights on volunteer, same with the authorities, same with all the partners that work at the airport. And it came together. So not easy, but we made it. And now, of course, the pendulum swings. And now you go from bust to boom. And yeah, I mean, within a very short period of time, we've gone to near nothing to needing to hire anyone you can, and putting all the staff there and getting everything ramped back up. And that's been a sort of polar opposite from having to cut and slash to frantically grow to keep up with the demand. So it's been a wild ride.
Your experience at Budapest Airport is similar, of course, with many other airports, that many people have moved out of the jobs at airports. And you know, I've traveled through Heathrow Airport in London several times in the last few months, and we keep hearing about labor shortages. Where have the people gone? Why have they left, and where have they gone?
I wish I knew. But yeah, we felt it just like any other. I mean, there's, you know, this summer, I think the aviation sector was best described as chaotic, I guess would be the best phrase. And you'd hear sort of some of the UK saying, well, you know, a lot of the workers, they've gone home back to our region. But I can tell you, I'm not sure where they are. I mean, we've put up salaries tremendously to attract people, but there is definitely a shortage. It's persisting. And frankly, I can't answer that question. I wish I knew.
So how are things at the airport now? I mean, now and looking ahead, let's say for the next year, what's the prognosis?
Yeah, I mean, it's healthy again. And so, as I said, the pendulum swings. And so we're at about 80% of 2019. And maybe some of that doesn't come back, and maybe some of it shouldn't come back. I mean, hopefully business travel is maybe a dinosaur, maybe it's a thing of the past. So it's a very healthy business right now. It's moving quickly. Terminals are full. People are wanting to travel again, and this is what you feel. So,
what sort of, in terms of having just come through the airport to get here, what sort of future infrastructure developments are you planning at the airport? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, I mean, of course, going through COVID, we were really locked down. I mean, as a business needs to be when it's basically effectively closed for the better part of a year. But indeed, you'll see a lot of construction at the airport. I think that the reality of the Budapest Airport is that it's nearing its capacity. And so it is kind of at an inflection point where you either need to add terminal capacity or you need to stop growth. You really, without that, your quality levels would be so poor that it's not what any of us want. I mean, I think quality is king, so it has to be there. So you'll see a lot of developments. I mean, we're permitting now to reopen Terminal 1, which is, if you've never been to Terminal 1, it's a beautiful building. It's absolutely stunning. So we need to preserve the historic elements, but we'll add a new pier onto it and we'd reopen this. And then eventually Terminal 3, which is, we're working on it now, it's a doubling of Terminal 2. So to really add capacity. And I think, the aim is to add capacity because I don't think an airport is just about sort of getting to A to B. It's more about, the journey. Look at this building. I mean, this is what an airport should also look like. And so, I think there's an evolution of that, and that takes space, and that takes investment, and that's the part of the cycle we're in now is to invest into capacity. Yeah. So there'll be a lot of changes.
That maybe brings me on to talking about airports in general as we start to think about the sort of wider issue of the aviation industry, sustainability. There's a growing focus on the environmental impact of aviation. Architects are designing a new generation of airports focused on sustainability and upgrading older airports. Some of the new supposedly sustainable airports look fantastic, but are they really sustainable?
I mean, is any building sustainable? I think that there's, I wouldn't say that we're there yet, that's for sure. It'll take time, but I think it is getting more and more sustainable. I mean, let's take an example. We redid our runway some years ago. And actually, when we did this, we had to dig up the old runway, and we recycled the entire amount. And so about 80-90% of your construction is fully recycled on spot. And these are changes that wouldn't have been done years ago. But at the end of the day, it makes environmental sense. But I don't see sustainability as a goal in itself. So to me, every sustainable solution needs to have a business case. It needs to have a reason, or else it effectively won't be done in the long run. Because you can't give state support to support everything. So these decisions are coming, these technologies are coming, but they're slow, they're being adapted, and it will take time for them to trickle in, but it is making progress. So I think buildings can be sustainable. It does cost more money in the short run, but it absolutely pays off in the long run. And so there needs to be a mindset change about how you view these topics.
Well, tell us about some of the things that you're doing at Budapest Airport. I understand Budapest Airport is carbon neutral. So what does that mean?
So I'm a little bit outspoken on this topic. I personally, I'm a very frustrated person when it comes to climate change. I just feel that there's a lot of talk, there's a lot of hot air, there's little action. And it's frustrating as sort of a leader of a company, because it's simply the only direction that we can head. And so at the airport, we are picking up speed, absolutely. And you mentioned carbon neutrality. Of course, if people don't know, so basically, if you're polluting a certain amount, I can give some money to say to you, And then you can do a project somewhere in the world that'll reduce emissions, and I can get credit for those emissions and then say, okay, my emissions are lower. And that's what we've been doing since 2018, but ultimately it's not a long-term sustainable direction for the planet. And it also raises a lot of questions, because how do I trust this Scottish-Hungarian guy? I mean, how do I know that this is really being saved and it's really something that wouldn't have happened anyways? And so, using credits and going towards carbon neutrality, it is a short-term benefit. It helps. It's a company trying to do what it can do, but it's not a final solution to the problem. Not at all. Net zero is the only true solution to this problem. And so, yes, we're carbon neutral, but I think that's something that we'll continue to do. But in the meantime, we'll run like hell towards net zero. And so, yeah, we've been taking a lot of actions. And unlike most of my peers, I don't see sustainability as kind of hugging trees and kissing panda bears. To me, there's underlying business cases behind this whole thing. And I think that the mindset towards this is completely off, and it's completely skewed, and it's time for a new way of thinking about sustainability. And what I mean by that is that there are economic reasons for doing all these actions, and they absolutely help a company to get a long-term competitive advantage over its peers for the long run. And that should be the driving force, especially when you're going to a board that maybe only cares about money. Talk their language. And I'm absolutely convinced that this mentality shift needs to be made. It's one that we have made. And sustainability needs to be just part and parcel of whatever you do on your daily life. I'm talking about a company. It just needs to be part of what you do. It's not a project. It's an underlying item that you simply deal with. And so we are doing various actions at the airport, and we're running towards net zero. I mean, the industry is aiming at 2050 for net zero. That's quite public. I think it's way too long. And so right now, our goal is sometime before 2035. That's our stated aim. I'd like to beat that, absolutely. And so that's where we're heading now. And it's a lot of small changes. And so we're absolutely, we've done a net zero roadmap, and we're heading towards net zero by 2035. So carbon neutrality, it's all good, great first step. But I think that's an antiquated view. I think it has to be net zero now.
So maybe we get a little bit more sort of organic here. What things are you doing to get to net zero? What projects have you got at the airport? Tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1,000 little projects. But I don't know, so give some examples. Right now, we're permitting for a solar park between the two runways. And again, it's not about, it isn't a silver bullet that's going to say, aha, we're now net zero. It's 1,000 little projects over a very long period of time that'll get you to that goal. And so solar is a good example. And again, we're not being saints in that regard, because it has a great financial return. All these things need to be rooted in a sustainable financial model, or else it's simply not going to run. The next recession comes and everyone's going to drop it. And so if you want this to be really, the sustainable actions to be sustainable, you're going to have underlying forces that really speak to people. We're also doing seismic work to do geothermal. So about 2 kilometers down under our feet right now, actually, is some of the best heat resources in Europe, or probably in the world, actually. I think it's way underutilized. At the current natural gas prices, this is just a no-brainer. And so we've started doing work on that. So we've done feasibility studies. A lot of things that aren't sexy, energy efficiency, all these things. Digitalization, these are things that aren't going to grab headlines, but at the end of the day, they are going to create a company that's much more, that has a lower cost base, that has a competitive advantage over others. And I think that's sort of where it's heading for us. And so it is something that we're also increasing the amount that we're talking to the public about it. So if you go online onto our website, I think in the next few days, we'll have our sustainability report out. It's our first one. You might ask, why is it taking so long? It's a good question. But we want to start communicating in a very open way and in a very transparent way that this is what it is, and this is where we're heading, and this is what we're doing. And people can then make up their own choices if it's enough or not. And so I think communications is a big one too.
Going back to something you mentioned earlier about how there are times when the airport was like a ghost town. We've just seen an article in the Guardian newspaper in the UK yesterday, which show that in the last 2 years there have been 40,000 so-called ghost flights, 5,000 flights going into and out of the UK that had no passengers, and 35,000 flights that had barely anybody on the plane. Can you explain what the rationale would have been for those flights taking place?
I can't justify it. So if you're asking me to justify it, I can't. But the rationale that the airlines are using for that is because, so there's in most airports there's slots, and so if you're an airline, you have your historic slots, and this means that if an airport is very full, that your airline was historically flying at this time, and if you were historically flying at the time, you're guaranteed to keep them. But you're only guaranteed to keep them if you use them.
Yeah.
And so the airlines were flying flights to show that they're using it. At the same time, they had a motivation to fly, because if you leave a plane too long on the ground, to get it back up in the air is extremely difficult and extremely expensive. At the same time, you have pilots that if they're not flying on a regular basis, they need to redo all the training. And all these things accumulate into a decision to fly with no one on board. And so it's a whole mix of topics that are all swirling around. Logical, I mean, in that sense, because we all want our pilots to be well trained. After the pandemic and you hop on your plane, you want to make sure that they've touched a plane at least once in the last few years. And so there is a logic to it, but maybe it could have been done differently.
Yeah.
But again, that's an airline topic, not so.
I suppose it takes it maybe to the fundamental question. Can flying ever be truly sustainable? And when we here in Europe look at this issue, do we look at it from the perspective of people who have been used to flying regularly? And in other parts of the world where flying is still something that people aspire to do, to get from A to B, for jobs, whatever it may be. The global division between the haves and the have-nots. Is it okay for the haves to tell the have-nots that, hey guys, sorry, too late. We got the chance to fly, but now it's ruining the planet, so you can't fly. So sustainability in flying, is there a solution?
Yeah, I mean, let's put it in context, and I'm not saying this as an excuse, so don't take it the wrong way. I mean, I think EU emissions, 2% is the aviation sector. I think 95% is actual airlines and 5% is airports. So we should put it in context, but it's still, a ton is a ton. I mean, there's no getting around that, a ton is a ton. And so do I think aviation can be sustainable? Yes, absolutely. Airports can do it quickly, and that's why you'll see us do it quickly. Some airports in Europe already are net zero, actually. And so I think here, you'll see airports get it quick, or at least the well-run ones will. For airlines, it's difficult, because the technology fundamentally does not exist yet. I mean, they're testing with it, they're creating it, it's coming. But I think realistically, before 2050, to have, airlines going long distances on some, say hydrogen or some new fuel, it's still a long way off. I mean, aviation is fundamentally built around safety. That's its ultimate aim, is safety. It's safety, 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 safety. And so you can't just put it in a new plane and put 200 people on and say, okay, let's see how it goes. I mean, this needs to be very well tested for well over a decade to make it happen. And the technology is not even there yet. And so I think it'll take time, but I do believe that it'll get there, yes. Yeah.
So where do you think the aviation industry generally has got work to do in making the whole industry more sustainable? And I know that you've been a critic of what we might call greenwashing, where people are making claims about being sustainable, but actually that's not the case. So where do you think the work needs to be done? What can be done now and in the next few years?
So somehow the system is fundamentally flawed. And what I mean by that is that businesses are driven by short-term gain. Politicians are driven by a 4-year cycle. But this problem doesn't fit into that box. And so somehow, somehow the base system isn't really working. So I think it's really like, if we want to tackle this problem, we're going to have to rethink the whole basic system that we're functioning within. And I think, and there's a role for governments, there's a role for all these things. And you ask, can we tell other countries that are less developed to now not fly? But I mean, how can you do that? I mean, our industry, our economy has gone through this sort of course, and now we're telling others that, hey, we've killed the planet. Sorry, no, you can't. And so I think here, there's no clear sort of direct answer, to be honest.
To what extent do you think there is greenwashing? To what extent are we seeing claims from the airline industry, from the aviation industry? To what extent are those claims misleading?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of greenwashing. I mean, and not to point fingers at anyone, but I mean...
Okay, you can point, please do point fingers.
No. I think there is. I mean, there's a lot of greenwashing. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of hot air about this, that, and this, that, because I think a lot of companies have misread the situation, and they think that us as the public, that we demand, a sustainable future, and that we're kind of happy with sort of being told, yes, it's coming, and seeing them hug trees and kiss panda bears. But at the end of the day, it's not really amounting to much. And you see this in the abuse of carbon credit systems and these sort of things. And so, I think until we can change the mindset of businesses, they will do the minimum amount in order to get that public tick, and that's all that they'll do. If we can convince the businesses and the governments that actually it's not just a tick to satisfy the public, but there's actually benefit for them to actually undertake these actions and reduce costs, in more stable costs, and kind of speak their language, only then will we actually get this greenwashing and start to move it away. And aviation's hard because you can put on regulation within the European Union, but you've got planes coming in from all around the world. It's really a global effort, so I think there is a lot of greenwashing. I think that this should clearly stop. We should call it out as a public when we see it, and hopefully then the public outcry will be enough to stop them from actually doing it and start acting.
On a more positive note, in your industry, what are the trends? What excites you looking ahead that makes you upbeat, optimistic about the business you're in? What are those trends that you're like the look of?
Yeah, I mean, I love the sector. I love kind of being in the arrivals area and seeing the raw emotions as people come and go, and the sadness and the happiness and this. At an airport, it's a very magical place. I'm most excited about sort of changing the journey into a very digital and very hands-off journey. I mean, right now it's very intrusive, and I don't know if maybe I'm the only one who's old enough, but the Total Recall, Arnold Schwarzenegger, if anyone has seen the original, and Arnold Schwarzenegger is sort of walking through this hallway where you can see his skeleton, and you can see the dog beside him, you see his skeleton, and it's basically it's a security lane where he's just walking and doing his thing, but he's actually being checked, he's being boarded, the whole process is happening as he's walking along. And the technologies to achieve that are coming. This is absolutely coming. This is absolutely there. You can walk through, if you're allowed to from a GDPR point of view, you could walk through a terminal, and by the time you get to the end, they're going to know who you are, where you've been, all these things, if the system would allow it. A lot of privacy issues, absolutely. But I'm excited to see a future where you can transform an airport into just, it's a hall that you walk through and you get on your plane, and it's all happening behind you. None of it you really know about. And you get to go where you want to go with less stress, without being, taken down this hallway and that hallway and taking out your bags and all these things. And so I think the digital journey is coming, and it's an exciting future. And I think it'll open up travel for a lot more people. It'll make it much more efficient. It'll make it, I was going to say low cost, but I think flying already is too low cost because I think it's the environmental impact of it isn't being factored into the price, which I think is wrong. But I love this digital future. I think it's the way it's going to head.
Before we wrap things up with some final messages from you to the audience, let's segue into an area which I know is personally important for you, which is the position of women in business, women particularly in senior business positions, because you have a rather unique perspective on this. So let's hear what that is.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's quite personal. My wife is a CEO of a company of a similar size. And so I've sort of watched her go through her career as I've gone through my own. And so I have a peer who, in all intents and purposes, is very similar to I am, but she's female and I'm male. And so I can compare these two in real time. And I've been doing this for decades. And yes, I mean, for anyone who thinks that the playing field is not skewed and tilted, they're wrong. It is tilted, this is for sure. And I think it's important to sort of stand up on stage and say that, yes, it is still tilted. And it is not correct. And, I can give you examples. We'll go to events and it'll be an invite for CEOs and we'll both enroll in this as CEOs of our own companies, and we'll show up and she's the spouse and I'm the CEO. This happens over and over and over. So I've even gone to the length of registering her as a CEO and me as spouse. You show up, I'm still the CEO, she's still the spouse. I mean, what is going on? And so I think it's important to call a spade when you see it. And so it is something that's important to me. I think it is something that still isn't there. And it's sort of it's not just one topic where you say, that's the problem. It's 1,000 little topics that you see every day. And I think it is getting better. This is for sure. It's definitely not there because I see it every day as a CEO, as a male CEO. I see this. I can compare it when I walk through the door every day. And so, anyway, I think it's a problem.
What sort of solutions? How can we make this much more gender equal?
Yeah, and it's not about getting some predetermined balance of 50-50. I mean, it's, the best talent should rise to the top regardless. I mean, obviously companies need whistleblowing, and that needs to be taken seriously. A fish smells from its head, and so if the top management doesn't take it seriously, then your company won't. I think the other one is that I think us as males, we have an obligation to call it out. You see it, and you don't call it out, you own it. You've just taken part in it. And so I think it is important that, that we remind our male colleagues that all the little things that they hear or that happen, that they need to call it out, that they need to say that that's not okay.
Yeah.
And I think if we start to do that, the message goes down pretty fast and everyone starts to understand that that's not acceptable.
Thank you for that. Final message to the audience on sustainability, on climate change, how we can help?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the choir. I mean, you guys get it, and so I think my message is more towards other companies and to governments, is to stop seeing sustainability as a sunk cost, stop seeing it as a mandatory box ticking, but see it as a business opportunity. See it as an investment in your long run, to get a competitive advantage, to lower your cost base, to have a stable cost base, and to change it. And I think once companies and governments start to understand this and really understand it, they'll start to change it, because that's how an economy works. That's how capitalism works. And I think that's the message to get across. All of you, we should get you in power soon. Maybe we'll solve it faster.
Well, I think a lot of these people here will be in power soon. Please give a warm thank you to Chris.
Thank you.